Welcome to the MHP Exchange podcast, where industry veterans Frank Rizzo and Eric Busadil generously share their wealth of knowledge in their new podcast dedicated to the manufactured housing space. They tackle tough questions to provide valuable insights for those considering investments in mobile home parks. If you're seeking answers in the manufactured housing space, this podcast is your go-to resource.
So this is a first, and I want to welcome everybody to the MHP Exchange podcast. I'm your host, Frank Rizzo. Joining me as always, well, most of the time anyway, my co-host and my partner, Eric Busadil. This is a first. We're going live on Instagram at the same time that we're doing this podcast. So if you're out there, you're listening, and you have questions, you can send them in as we're sitting there and talking to the one and only Andrew Keel from the Keel team. And for those of you who don't know Andrew, but if you're in the space, you do. He's an owner and operator of over 5,000 lots throughout the country. We're really pleased to have you on today. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Excited to dive in.
Yeah, you know, we were thinking about this could go a lot of different ways. But, you know, one of the things that I've noticed, and we follow each other on LinkedIn, you have a deal right now that you're working on, and you had a post on it the other day, and it's something that if you're in this space, it happens quite a lot. You're obviously in a contract and a deal, and all of a sudden you get on site, and it's not what you expect.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to share a little bit about that and talk about what happened right there. Not that we're coming in hot, but we're coming in hot.
Yeah, we're coming in hot. Yeah, it's pretty disappointing. You know, you get a deal and you're excited and you're kind of talking with the seller, and he says, "Hey, I got 229 lots occupied," and you know, at a high level, everything pencils out. We're looking at pricing, and okay, this looks like a decent deal that, you know, at market rents by end of year 2. You know, we can get to above a 9 cap. So we're like, this is great, right? For a institutional size property. And then we fly out, you know, it was West Texas, and we're, you know, going through the property. You know, we typically go through the property with the seller, you know, like drive around, kind of look at the units, and if there's any homes that look vacant or suspect, you know, kind of ask questions. So we're doing that with the seller, and you know, ultimately there ended up being 187, I think, that was occupied. So there was like a huge discrepancy, right, of like 40 lots plus, and you know, it was just super disappointing. And so we just kind of asked the seller, like, "Hey, how are we supposed to like make sense of this? You know, like with what you're at right now?" And he's like, "Oh, well, you know, I'll get all these occupied by closing. You know, we're just, you know, had some collections issues and things like that. And it's a mom and pop, you know, like everything's back of the napkin." So it's just, you're at that point where it's like, you know, you don't want to waste a bunch of money and time kind of continually pouring into the deal. If, you know, if the deal's not going to pencil out, right? Because he wants a price that's higher than we can pay him. So we're kind of in that process right now where it's like, all right, which of these homes are demos, right? Like which of these are like, absolutely, we're gonna have to demo if we take them over. And then which of these do we think that he can actually get occupied by closing, and trying to like find a middle ground. But yeah, definitely was disappointing getting out there and realizing, wow, this is a completely different story than what we were expecting.
And it happens more often than one would imagine, that exact scenario. And just looking back at the handful of times that's happened to us, they say it so nonchalantly, right? Like, yeah, we'll have a handful, we'll have them filled by the time you buy it. And it's like one of those things where they really mean it, right? Like in their head,
yeah,
it's not a big deal. And here you are, you know, a professional in the space where those numbers really do mean something. And I think, you know, when we were newer in the space, you know, it's just one of those things where how do you go back to them and insult them and say, you know, you're wrong? You know, so it's one of those things where I think that in order to make that a successful transaction, you have to just be very delicate in how you handle that situation, especially if it was, such a, nonchalant situation as you're speaking about.
Exactly. Yeah. And you got to be gentle with it because, he didn't go consult a broker. He thinks that the inherent value of the property is because of the property. It's not because of the income. It's not because of the occupancy. That's just kind of what he thinks it's worth because of, how he came up with it. So I think that's, just dealing with mom and pops direct. You kind of have to just, tread lightly and there's ways around it, right? Like on one deal that we sold, we paid lot rent for 12 months on like 10 homes that were vacant at closing, uh, as part of the deal, right? Because that helped the buyer get, pay a higher price. And, dollars and cents wise, it wasn't that big of a deal for us to get the price that we wanted. So there's ways like around it, but this is such a big discrepancy, right? Like over 40 lots that it just is like, it was kind of a slap in the face.
So here, but here's an interesting question when it comes to that, especially when you're dealing with mom and pops, right? Because I'd imagine, not knowing the deal, but the mom and pop, you're probably a little bit below market anyway on those rents, right?
Yep.
Okay. So does it become, and this is the question that you struggle with as an operator, right? Like, is it a underwriting issue, right? Because now, you've got a 20% discrepancy. Or is it an operational issue? Because I know if you're going in to a community that's already below market, and now we've got to kind of step people up or try to get that to market. If I have a legacy resident, I'm probably going to wait to make those increases, and I'll probably step it up slower. But new people coming in, they're going to come in at market. So in some ways, there's a balancing act to where you might say, like, does that help, right? That in having those vacancies, is that maybe a way where it could be beneficial to execute the plan? Does that come into some of your,
Yeah, because it depends on what the homes need, right? If out of those 40 plus homes, if half of them are demos because they're just completely trashed, then it's a different story. It's more capital intensive. But hey, if each of those homes need $4,000, right, of quick paint, and carpet to like get occupied, yeah, it's less of an issue if the market's hot and your test ad went off, which in this market it was kind of average. It wasn't like it crushed it, but yeah, no, that's a good way to kind of look at it, Frank. Is, hey, what am I gonna have to put into this thing? With a demo, you're gonna have to spend like $3 to $4,000 to demo it and get it out of there. Then you're gonna have to get the lot ready if you're gonna bring in a new home and crown it and put the pillars in and concrete work and utility work to upgrade everything, then bring a new home in. It's a math equation at some point.
So, at this point, you've been doing this for well over a decade, right? How many communities have you been involved in from inception till now?
It's right around 50. Yeah, right around 50 parks at this point. We have a few under contract that we're excited about, but yeah.
So what has, and during that time, especially now, where do you see like the market shaping up being more difficult? Do you see more opportunity now? Are you seeing that those opportunities are lessening because of, prices being very stuck, right? The market.
Yeah, I think it's jammed up a little bit, and we're seeing some inventory come online, but I think a lot of sellers are just kind of back in, 2020, 2021 and kind of wanting those wanting those prices that they were, thinking that their communities were worth then, even though interest rates are higher. So it's been tough, to find deals that work, right? Especially on actuals. So we're looking at, and our model is to look typically at a lot of value add deals that have a lot of infill, and that's kind of how we kind of make up the difference on some of these deals. Is, hey, buying below market rents, buying parks that are 75% occupied, 70% occupied. That's kind of a typical deal for us. But yeah, it's been tougher, to get deals done. I don't know what you guys are seeing, but our typical model is to buy with like a regional lender, and then refinance within 5 years into an agency debt, longer term, financing. And with our regional lenders right now, we're seeing 7.5 to 8.5% rates. So it's tough to get a deal to cash flow. Given that.
Sure, and it's been with rates over the last, let's say 18 months being elevated. It's been a little bit of a different environment in raising capital. I know that you're out there, you're syndicating deals, you're raising. I mean, do you syndicate? Do you have a fund? Like, what's your model? And how are you raising capital these days?
Yeah, we syndicate. We do 506B and 506C syndications, just kind of, based on the deal. But yeah, so, pool together some investors, everybody will, put in a portion, and then, split up equity, and then we manage it on behalf of the partnership.
Sure. Have you seen it currently in the current environment? Like, listen, 4 years ago, you could have gotten almost any deal funded, and probably really, really quickly. But that's changed over the last 24 months. I mean, do you see that even with the investors that you've worked with? Is it, how is raising capital in this environment over the last 24 months? How has that been? Is that pace slowed up, or do you still see that investors are having an appetite for deals?
Yeah, I do think it's gotten a little bit tougher, right? And it's tough to get people to pull their money out of a money market that's making 5.25%, 5.5%, right? With basically no risk. So to go, get an 8 pref or a 10 pref, right? So it's been a little bit tougher to raise capital. But I will say that, just the opportunity, within the mobile home park sector, as it becomes more institutionalized and more lenders are willing to lend in the space, and it's just becoming a more mainstream asset class, where it kind of always had that stigma in the past, but there's just some big names that have kind of thrust it out there, like Brandon Turner and Frank Rolfe and some of these other guys that are getting into this, and a bunch of private equity groups now own large MH portfolios. So I think there's still a good opportunity, because it's always been historically very fragmented, with a lot of mom and pop owners, owning the majority of the mobile home parks across the country. But I think that's changing. I think it used to be like 70% of the parks were owned by mom and pops. I'd love to see an update of that, given what happened, with transaction volumes over the last, 5 to 10 years.
Sure. I have to believe that number has shifted drastically. But it's still that difference in ownership between, institutional ownership, new entrants into the space, and to the mom and pop. Like right now, I mean, we've seen, when we talk about investors coming in, I think there is a buzz of people who want to get into the space, who understand that affordable housing is a hotbed issue, and they just don't know how to place it, even though they know they want to get in the manufactured housing space. They just don't know how they want to place that capital, right?
I think, Frank, there has become a buzz for a while, but I think that, what has, changed investors' outlook is really the market right now. I think right now, like Andrew said, there's been such an influx of new companies and talk about the space and demand for, low-income housing across the country. I just think that it's the market, that has really put people set back. Like you said, I mean, people have their money sitting in, 5.5% CDs or whatever. It's safe, right? But I do think people are definitely more aware of it. And it is, I don't want to say, it's easier to talk about people, right? It's not like, we're from New York. So when we first started talking to people about it, it was like not even anything at all anyone wanted to talk about for a while.
Sure.
And where we are, we're the people that are involved in the space in New York. A lot of people know us. But it's, people are familiar now with the space. I think it's just a market that's holding people back. And money's tight for people as well, right? People have less disposable money to invest, period.
And I'm sure you've probably seen this too with your people that you've spoken with. I've had investors come back to me with really weird offers from other sponsors, right? Like I had an investor talk to me talking the other day, and he was presented an opportunity in, Florida, different sponsor that said at a certain tier, there's different tiers. I'm sure you have with cap, over $1 million, 100% of the return goes to the LP. And, you got to scratch your head and like, well, how does that work? Right. Like, some of that is people who are trying to chase out deals and looking for capital willing to give crazy, offers to get that capital in. I guess that's part and parcel with the market. How are you seeing opportunity now? I know you said you start to see things open up a little bit. Do you think that that's going to change as the Fed comes to start lowering rates? You think there'll be more inventory that comes to the market?
Yeah, I think that there's always going to be a certain level of transactions that need to happen, right? Like a fund is sunsetting, or you come to the end of a life cycle, of a deal, and people want to get their capital out. People want to realize the gains. So I've seen some deals that are coming out. I've also seen some distressed deals, right? That I think some groups got in and bought stuff, maybe 5 years ago. That was on the spreadsheet, it looked really good, right? It's a value add deal, lots of infill opportunity. And then they got in and started operating these mobile home parks and realized, wow, this is actually a lot of work. This is not, a passive business. And wow, infill is really hard, right? Like there's a lot of moving parts here. And that's why, I think we're seeing some of that. We saw a deal recently where, looked great numbers wise, it was like 86 lots out of like 126 total lots. And then we're doing due diligence and we get up there and we're walking the park, and on underneath some of these homes, there's like this big sinkhole, like underneath of the concrete pads. And, a newbie investor might not walk the park and know what to look for, right? And might not pull the skirting back and look under and see what's going on, right, with the connections under the homes. But there's literally, they built the park on like a wetlands area. They didn't do the grading properly. So whenever it rains, there's just a huge runoff problem. And then the water is not mounded properly underneath of the homes. So the water ends up sitting under the homes. And then they actually had these like frost-free risers that had leaks in them. And then those were like, causing puddling underneath of the slabs. So now the slabs are cracking. So there's just this like air bubble, sinkhole underneath of the concrete pads. And the local city won't even let them occupy those homes. And when we started asking questions like, hey, this is a brand new vinyl sided shingle roof home, why is this not occupied? Said, oh, we're in permitting it. We just got to get the permit. We're working on it. But then we asked the tenants and like, oh, it's been that way for like a year and a half. Right? Like, okay, what's going on here? And sure enough, there's these sinkholes underneath the concrete pads. So there's just things like that with mobile home parks that like, that's why you want to invest with an experienced operator. Yeah, the terms may not be 100% of the return to the LP, but guess what? You're investing with experience. You're investing with someone that has a due diligence checklist and has made mistakes previously and learned from them, and that's, I think where a lot of people are, still investing in the space.
Yeah. We've seen that in deals where if you don't ask the questions or talk to the residents and try to get to the bottom of it, like the numbers may look great on the surface, but once you start peeling that onion back, you find out there's a reason why either it hasn't sold, hasn't moved, or there's a reason why maybe you should stay away. I mean, we looked at a deal recently that we were in contract for a great price in a market that we are familiar with. And again, right off of the river embankment, right? Partially in a flood zone. And when it rains, half the park would be flooded and everybody would park their car in the front of the community. And we noticed it because on the neighboring parcel, somebody had their home probably 10 feet up in the air that we thought they had a basement. We looked at it like, why is this home so elevated? And then we realized it's because of the flooding comes all the way to the front, that this person on a separate property put their, home 10 feet up in the air. And we looked for a retrade. And then when we couldn't agree on the numbers, we walked away. Somebody else bought it. But when we talked to the owner, they still have the problem. They're like, we're just trying to manage it. That's, a problem that you can't manage, right? Like you have to go completely redo. But,
Yeah.
you hit on something with new investors coming into the space, and they don't realize how nuanced this.
Well, Frank, this is real estate, right? But I think when people talk about real estate or investing in real estate, they have this concept, even though, running an apartment building or owning and operating single families or, 2 or 3 unit properties, it's still a business, right? But it's a different kind of real estate. And if you're looking to invest in manufactured housing space, yes, it's real estate, but it's a business, and there's just so many variables. There are so many variables. I mean, you have to have the right team. You have to. I mean, you could spend, twice the amount of money you really should spend on setting up a home. If you can't keep your numbers down, I mean,
It's a great point.
if you can't keep your numbers down, it is very different. How do you keep your numbers down? I mean, you have to make sure you're dealing with the right vendors. I mean, you cover, I think, a bigger area than we do, but I mean, we have and know what our prices are going to be in doing stuff. And I mean, listen, when we go into a new market, sometimes there's a little bit of a variance, but there's just so many variables in real estate in general. But this particular space, especially if you're doing, a deep value add opportunistic property, which again, that's really where most opportunities are now in this space.
Sure.
You really have to either partner with somebody who knows what they're doing, or really start small. Start small and make sure you map out to the best of your ability what you are going to spend.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Do you self-manage all your communities?
We do. Yeah, we self-manage, and that's another, nuance, right? Is like it's very management intensive. This isn't a triple net, commercial real estate investment. This is very hands-on. You got to pursue, collections. and to say that, I think whenever I talk to someone new about mobile home parks, they're like, "Oh, you probably have to chase all your money every month." And that's not the case. 95% of our tenants pay on time and everything's fine. It's just the 5%, that we have to pursue a little bit. And a lot of them end up paying, right? It's just giving them, that extra time. But yeah, it's management intensive. There's no doubt about it. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, 100%. And I almost think that we tried going the management route, like when we first started, and we realized if you want to control the product, you got to control the process, and you have to have that operations piece. So when you acquire an asset, you have a community manager there. Do you have a regional manager on top of that? Like, how does your operation look?
Yeah, so we have, I think it's 42 employees now. So we'll have an on-site manager that typically, will inherit with the property, and we'll kind of give them a chance, through due diligence and after we buy the property, and kind of see if they're a good fit for our new model and our new systems. Most of the time they're not. And we have to, get boots on the ground. We'll have a transition manager. She's based out of St. Louis. She'll fly to the new property and be there for at least the first 2 weeks, depending on, how big the property is and so forth. And she'll kind of take over and be that on-site manager and that transition manager. We have a checklist that she'll go through that she needs to do everything from set up the Google My Business page and claim it from the old ownership to get people signed up on pay lease. She'll go meet with every single tenant and help them get signed up on pay lease so that people are paying, automatic, online, with credit card or ACH. And that's been huge because, taking checks and money orders like we started originally, at some point you got to hire a person just to open up envelopes and to deposit checks. So we just found moving to pay lease was a huge advantage for us. And, we'll have asset managers. Each asset manager will be in charge of about 5 or 6 parks in those on sites. And we'll kind of maintain KPIs and do KPI meetings every week, kind of going over, the property's operations.
So where do you think most new investors miss? Because I'm sure you've seen this, and you alluded to this before, and we've acquired some parks from sophisticated real estate guys in their own rights, whether they were builders or investors. And they would come in, they'd buy a park, maybe 2 parks, and then realize, hey, this isn't for me. So, like, where do you think that disconnect is from, where they think this is something they want to do to, I got to get out.
Yeah, no, and I have a great example. Someone that I know and follow. He owns like I think it's over $1 or $2 billion worth of multifamily. He got into the MH space, bought like 9 parks. I think they were in Pennsylvania, and within 6 months was like hired someone from like the top, like Sun Communities, Yes Communities, hired someone from the top firms to come in and run everything. And then within 6 months, he's like, "Whoa, this isn't working. Like, we need to sell everything." And like, sold those properties right away. And this is someone that you would think would be like extremely high level property management expertise, but it's very different than multifamily syndications, right? Like a lot of those guys, there's a lot of third party property management companies that do a great job with uh managing property management in multifamily, right? But MH is such a different dynamic. There's so many nuances that you need someone that's been boots on the ground that understands the assets. But I think where a lot of people mess up is park owned homes and like just in due diligence, not getting inside of them and making sure that you're getting what you think you're getting in terms of paying for those park owned homes, if in what you're paying for, right? Are we capitalizing the park owned home income, or are we paying like a Kelly Blue Book value for the actual home itself? I think that's important. I think payroll is another big one that people kind of get carried away with. We're buying a park right now. It's 60 lots. For some reason, the payroll is 226,000 a year. Like the on-site manager is his daughter, and she's making 100. There's a maintenance guy that he's making 75, and then there's other general people that are making money off of this. So I think people mess up on payroll, and then I think due diligence is the big one. Frank, I think that's where people uh, buy properties with lagoons and other stuff, and they don't really know what they're getting into. And I think that's where a lot of risk comes in, is really like not fully calculating what you're finding in due diligence to like reserves and making sure you have enough money in the bank in case something goes wrong.
I think those are great points, and I think also people there's a connotation out there with some investors. Well, if they own the home, I don't have to do anything, right? And they don't realize that there's a lot of different touch points that you have with those residents, even if they own that home, right?
Totally.
In some ways, you're the president of a condo board, right? Where they don't want you, in their house, but they want to know that you're there, and they want to know that you're involved, and they want to know if there's an issue that is being handled. So there's so many different touch points that you can't just, fix it and forget it. You have to be involved with your resident the whole way through to maintain that culture and that emotional attachment to that community.
Right? Yeah. And act like, hey, that's a tenant owned home, but act like, hey, I may get that home someday, right? Like that's in my park. It's something like 95% of mobile homes never move from the initial spot they're installed in. So think about that, right? Eventually that home could be yours, right? Even though that tenant owns it, the chances of them moving it out is very unlikely. Whenever they decide to sell it and move on, you're going to have a chance to buy it, or what we try to do is broker the sale of it, right, to a new tenant that's going to be approved, that's going to want to live in the park and stay in the park. But also when people get in trouble, right? This is something that happens, in a lot of our tertiary parks. They get in trouble. They, their car breaks down. They're having a rough patch, and then oh geez, their hot water heater stops working, and then maybe they get a roof leak or something like that. So even on those tenant-owned homes, we're trying to be proactive to help the tenants to come in and say, hey, let us front you, the $1,000 to get this fixed. We'll give you a loan. You can start paying it back, trying to like work with people to keep the home quality good, right? Because the last thing I want is the roof caving in, having a much bigger problem. Now I got to demo the home and bring in a new home when I could have solved the problem with $1,000 to fix the roof leak. So just things like that I think, if you come in thinking, oh, this is passive, everybody owns their homes, they're going to maintain it, I'm just going to stay completely out of it, you could end up in trouble.
Sure. And you have to have programs like that for your residents. And listen, you mentioned this, with park-owned homes. I mean, do you have park-owned homes and rent them out? Do you work more on a tenant-owned community? Like, what's your model inside the community when you own it?
Yeah, so we're going in with the end in mind. and we want to convert all of our park-owned homes to tenant-owned homes, or at least get them down to below 20% of the total occupancy, because that's what the agency lenders require, Fannie and Freddie. And our whole goal is to buy this thing, do exactly what they require, and then go refinance and put that long-term debt on it. So we're going in, removing hitches, installing off-street parking, all the things that the agency lenders want, fixing all the deferred maintenance. That's what we're doing to get that debt. So they want to have as few park-owned homes as possible, and that's 20% or less typically. So we're going to go in and try to convert those, and if we're infilling, we'll bring in some new homes, and then we'll reserve some for rentals if we have to. If like the home sales aren't going as as quickly as we'd liked, which has happened, where we're like, okay, we're going to bring in 20 homes and we're going to try to sell them all, but we only sell 4 a year or something like that. So we'll rent out some of the other ones to generate some income, with the end in mind being like, hey, how can we get this person to qualify for financing to buy this home eventually. But yeah, that's kind of how we do it. Do you guys do something similar?
Yeah, something very similar.
Very similar. I mean, our goal there is to have a tenant-owned community, because we think that just makes the community better and make longer-term residents. So we try to provide a path to home ownership. So we have the homes there. We want to give people an opportunity to own them. And if we bring in new homes, we want to be able to sell them. We did have a question come in. So what states do you operate in currently? And are there any states that you shy away from?
Yeah, great question. So we operate, I think it's like 14 states now, from mainly in the middle of the country. So from like North Dakota down to Arkansas, all the way over to Pennsylvania. We own some in Georgia and North Carolina as well, but most of it is right in the middle. Indiana. We own some in Illinois. We own some in Missouri. So that's kind of really where the most of our portfolio is. And the reason is we're going to landlord-friendly states, right? Red states. With good, landlord-tenant laws, and give a lot of leverage or reasonable leverage to the landlord. We have purchased a park in New York, which I'm curious to talk with you guys about that, over near Buffalo. It's under contract to be sold right now. Basically, we bought it with 3 tenants that weren't paying, and they're still not paying. But we try to shy away moving forward from New York, from California, from Illinois, as they become more blue states and have more regulation and things like that around the non-payment process and tenant-owned homes and so forth.
You didn't close on the property in New York, did you?
No, we did. Yeah, we bought that. Geez, it was like 2.5 years ago, and it was like a stabilized deal. And we're like, this is a 9 cap on actuals. Like, how bad could it be? And it's really sad, quite honestly, because it just doesn't make sense. Like we get in front of the judge, and every 6 months he just kicks the can down the road. He's like, hey, they don't have anywhere to go. They have kids, and we're just gonna give them 6 months, and we'll revisit this. So it's like, that's not really fair, right? Are you gonna take their past due rent off of my property taxes? Don't mention that, or you get thrown out of the courtroom, right? So it's very tenant friendly, and there has been some rental assistance through COVID and things like that. But yeah, it's very interesting. And do you guys own in New York, or how do you guys handle that?
So the way we handled that is, starting in 2016, we really made a pivot out, and I think the last remaining, other than my primary residence and our office building, which we are in, I no longer own any rental property in New York. So That is how I handle it. I think that New York has proven to be very challenging for the individual investor. It's, you're not a Blackstone or Apollo that can mitigate that risk over thousands and thousands of units. I need to make sure that my properties are cash flowing, right? Because otherwise it becomes a liability. And I couldn't take that risk. And I think, I had the ability of sitting down with a city council member back in 2016 and hearing what their thoughts were on, rent control and trying to make apartments affordable inside of New York City, which was just mind-boggling, that I left that meeting, and it was me with like 8 other real estate professionals and 2 city council members. And I think I called you up after that meeting. I was like, hey, I bought a mobile home park in 2013. Why don't we take a trip down south? And that's what really got us, headlong going into the space. And then over time, we just kind of shifted out completely. So unless you want to go deep dive into multifamily inside of New York City.
One of the challenges with our investors is, a lot of people we know and people we've done business with over the years are from New York, right? And, when you grow up in New York and your family has real estate and, you're doing something else, your dream is to own some real estate and retire, but, the blue states, New York included, the numbers don't make sense either here. But even if the numbers did make sense, it's very hard to own a property long term and find the right resident who's going to, be respectful of, just like you said, it's very unfair, bottom line. So we now, when people come to us and talk to us about real estate locally, it's just, it's wild. It doesn't add up.
So you're spread out in different states. So how do you choose a market to be in? Like, is there anything that, all right, if I'm going to be in Indiana, is there something that county has to have, that city has to have? Like, what are your drivers to look? Because, listen, you can find value in a lot of places, but you might not necessarily want to be there. So is there anything that you look at as key indicators or things you should look at inside of that market to be like almost a bellwether for you?
Yeah, we've done a lot of research into this, and we actually have come down to two metrics that we feel matter quite a bit. One would be an MSA with over 50,000 population, being, within driving distance of that. And the other one's median home price. That's something that's fairly new for us. When we first got started, we were, kind of just running and gunning, buying stuff, in the Midwest that made sense, and we were getting good pricing on it. But we were buying in more tertiary markets that maybe had 100,000, median home price. And what we realized is those parks tended to have higher turnover. And that's kind of the silent killer of mobile home parks, is that turnover cost, right? When you have to move someone out and you have to, put $4 or $5 into the home and refill it. And then hopefully, right, if they stay, long term, you're good, but they don't always do that when you're doing like RTO type of contracts. So we started looking at parks with median home price above 200,000, and the turnover just is drastically less, and obviously there's other factors there, like the quality of the homes and other things like that. But I think that there's something to be said in those markets that, which is a lot of markets now, right? As home prices have gone up, where median home price is above 200K, there's just definitely a lot more, demand and a lot more bang for your buck.
Especially if you're bringing in new homes, because then you could be the real value player in that market, right? You bring in a brand new home, you can offer it super competitively. So that's a good indicator for people to look at. Like, any last tips that you would have for somebody who's thinking about investing in the mobile home park space?
I'm a big fan of education and getting educated. I recommend the Frank and Dave boot camp. Attending that, I think it's worth every penny. I recommend getting hooked in on different podcasts and YouTube channels like your guys, and getting on the forums. There's a Bigger Pockets forum that talks about mobile home parks. There's the MHU forum on mobile home parks. There's the Facebook group, and the LinkedIn group on mobile home park, mastermind. So I think just getting connected and getting, seeing what other operators are doing and networking with them and getting educated is by far the most important thing.
Sure. I got one more question that came in from Instagram, if you have time.
Sure.
Which is, how did you get started in the MH space?
Yeah, so I ended up getting started. Was flipping houses around Central Florida, and through that, I was like putting out bandit signs and sending out yellow letters, doing the whole bit. And I got a lead on 2 mobile homes in Ocala, Florida, which is like an hour and a half away from where I was living in Orlando. And I went up there, ended up buying the 2 homes for $1,100 a piece, and came home and got on YouTube and typed in how to make money with mobile homes. And I found this guy, Lonnie Scruggs, who wrote a book, Deals on Wheels, where he sells homes on contract, in other people's parks. And basically that's what I did with these 2 homes. And I was like, wow, I found it. This is it. So I ended up doing like 19 of those Lonnie deals with individual trailers where I would buy them and then fix them up a little bit and then sell them on contract, get a down payment and get monthly payments. And through that, I met a park owner who kind of like took me under his wing and basically showed me like the model of syndication where you can pool together investors' money and buy bigger assets because, it's more scalable. There's better tax consequences and so forth. And he kind of shared all that with me. So I was very fortunate. And that's how I got started. I went to Frank and Dave's boot camp, and lucky enough, I met my first investor there. That was my first equity partner was at that event.
Wow, it's great. Great. It's a great story. And you've been super successful, and you have a podcast too, Andrew. That's, if you want to share that with everybody.
Yeah, my podcast is called the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. It's kind of geared towards educating, interested passive investors on kind of what to look for in mobile home parks when, looking to be kind of like a passive, LP. So yeah, thank you.
And I'll tell you what, I picked up a lot here, and we talk about this, but one of the things that I picked up here is that you can't underestimate your due diligence and making sure that you're doing it right, and you really have somebody there guiding you through if you haven't done this before, because you could easily lose money in this space. You could do something great or being something great, and you could lose money because you just didn't do your homework. Anything that you picked up here, that you
picked up a lot. One thing is if you are looking to get into the space and own, just my opinion is just start small and do it in an area that you're able to actually learn how to operate it and the inner workings of it yourself. Start small.
Norman Skillings wanted to thank you for the value you've provided him.
So, thank you, Norman. Appreciate that.
Andrew, if anybody wants to reach out to you, where should they reach out to you? Where should they be able to contact you?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. The best way would just be via my website, which is keelteam.com. It's located right down here for those watching the video. KEEL team, like a basketball team.com.
Andrew, this has been great. Thank you very much for joining us today. Learned a lot. And if you like this show, if you liked this program, follow us on YouTube at Trailer Park Turnaround. Follow us on Spotify at the MHP Exchange Podcast. Like it, share it. We appreciate you. Armin Bioli says, hello to the goats of the industry. So, hey, Armin, thank you for listening out there. Class act. And he just opened a gym. If you're down there in the Tampa area and you're interested in MMA, make sure you join his gym. But I want to thank Andrew for being part of this. And for everybody, this is the MHP Exchange podcast with Frank Rizzo and Eric Busatel, brought to you by the MHPExchange.com. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, talk to you soon.